Last Sunday, the sermon at Liberty was God hiding in plain sight from the book of Isaiah, where Isaiah says, "Seek the Lord, you'll find him. Listen to him. Call out to him, because he will hear you." But the outline for this coming Sunday, for tomorrow's sermon, is also in the book of Isaiah, chapter 51, verses 1 through 6. And the title of the sermon is "Stand on the Rock or Descend into Darkness." From Isaiah chapter 51, hear these words: "Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn. Look to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, to Sarah who bore you. For I called him alone and blessed him and increased him. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden again, and the desert will be like a garden. There will be joy and gladness and thanksgiving and the voice of melody." Do you hear Isaiah's words? Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. Look to the rock from which you were hewn. And then these words from the book of Ephesians, chapter number 6, verse number 12. "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, against human beings. We wrestle against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual arrogance and death in wicked places, in the heavenly places." Comes as no surprise to you if I tell you that we're in a mess as a country. We're in a mess theologically. We're in a mess sociologically. We're in a mess culturally. When you look around us, you see that we have all kinds of problems, and that comes as no surprise to you. All you have to do is turn on your television, watch any newscast, and you see problems and troubles and burnings and riotings and destruction and death every way you look almost. And it becomes very discouraging. But the question that arises, how on earth did we get to this place? How did we get to where we are? How did we get to the point where we are troubled on every side? I can deal with it myself because I'm an old man, and I know that at some point the Lord will take me away. But I worry about my children, about my grandchildren, and even my great-grandchildren, yet unknown. I worry about the young babies in our congregation and what they're going to have to face as they grow up and what they're going to have to deal with. There is a solution, but in my mind, we have to examine how we got to this place before we ever in this world can discover the solution. And quite frankly, we arrived at this place from something that began in the Garden of Eden. For you see, in the Garden of Eden, thousands of years ago, we began to descend into darkness and move out of the light. We see the solution, but before we get to the solution, we have to first of all confess that there is a problem and that there is a cosmic dimension to this problem. We are now engaged in spiritual warfare. You go to Washington, D.C., you go to Washington State, you go to Oregon, you go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, you go to other places where there are riots, places in California, and even to some degree in Atlanta. And we look, oh, this is flesh and blood. This is man against man. No, that's not. This is evil versus good. This is the powers of Satan attacking the powers of God and attacking the people of God and seeking to destroy and seeking to tear down and seeking to cause as much havoc as he can. We are engaged in this cosmic proportion warfare. Paul recognized this when he wrote the book of Ephesians in chapter number 6, and there are other verses, but verses that surround verse number 12, where Paul says, "Put on the whole armor of God, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith, the breastplate of righteousness, feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace." And then he says you need all of this armor, but he says this is spiritual armor. This is not literally a breastplate of steel or iron or bronze. This is a spiritual battle, Paul says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's not against human beings. But he says, rather, he uses 4 words. One of those words is force. He says there are forces, there are authorities, there are rulers, and he says there are powers. Verse 12, chapter number 6. Forces arrayed against us, armies, battalions, platoons, squads, companies of evil arrayed against us. And then there are authorities, and he speaks of this in terms of the devil having generals and captains and corporals and colonels and lieutenant colonels and other people and generals, people of authority. And then he speaks of the rulers that goes to the very top of the list. Rulers that have power. And he says it's an evil power. It's a power that is not benign, but it is a malignant power that seeks to kill and seeks to destroy. Because each of these words that Paul uses is referring to a satanic evil, the cosmic struggle between God and the devil. So when we look at the mess we're in, this is not just a flesh and blood mess. This is a cosmic mess. This is good against evil. This is Satan attacking the people and the person of God himself, and as he could. And all began in the garden. Our descent into darkness, the struggle began with something as innocuous as a conversation, something as seemingly innocent as a conversation. And the devil comes into the garden, and there is Eve, and she is alone. And he simply, don't you know, if you could permit me to narrate it for you, this is not scriptural. The Bible does not say this, but let me just kind of dramatize it for you, if you will, please. And the devil walks up to Eve, and he doesn't come slapping and knocking and kicking her around. He comes and he, perhaps if he's wearing a cap, if a serpent could wear a cap, but he speaks very innocently to her. But in his conversation, there is a suggestion that is buried deep within those words. Satan didn't show up with a chainsaw determined to saw down the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He simply came with words. He came with, "Good morning, Miss Eve." And don't you know that Eve probably spoke back? And the devil says, "Oh, it's nice weather we're having, isn't it? Oh, it's beautiful weather. It's just right. About 72 degrees. Couldn't be any better. After all, this is the Garden of Eden." "Oh, yes, I know," says the devil. "Lovely breeze, nice garden. My goodness, I know that you enjoy being here in this garden. Don't you enjoy this?" And Eve says, "Sure, we enjoy this." And all along, Satan is building to something, but so far it seems so innocuous and it seems so innocent. Maybe he remarks, "Oh my, in your garden you have such beautiful trees, and they have such wonderful leaves, and that fruit just looks absolutely luscious. Don't you know how good the fruit looks? Never seen better looking fruit in my life," says the serpent. And then he says to her, "Have you looked at all of this?" "Why, sure, we've looked at all of it, the fruit." And then say, "Have you tried every fruit?" says the devil. And, "Oh, yes," says Eve, "we've tried everything." And the devil says, "You mean you've tried that tree over there?" "Yes." "The one with the yellow fruit?" "Yeah, we've tried that one." "The green fruit?" "Yeah, we've tried that one." "The striped fruit?" "Yeah, we've tried that one too." The fruit that smells so good?" "You've tried that?" "The fuzzy one?" "Oh, yeah, we've tried all of them. And everything has been so good." And then the devil says, he points to another tree. And he says, "Have you tried that one?" And Eve says, "Oh, no, we haven't tried that one. We wouldn't dare try that one." "Oh, really? Why would you not try that one?" Because the devil says, "Oh, that's the best tree of all. Look how pretty it is. Look at how the leaves shimmer. And look how good the fruit smells." Eve says, oh no, we never have tried that one because God told us not to. And the devil said, God? What does God know? But you see, God knows everything. God knows what will happen when Eve takes that first taste. The devil says, what does God know? God's holding out on you because God is jealous. And he knows that when you partake of that fruit, well, you'll be just as strong as he is, and you will know just as much as he knows. But Eve did not know and would not know all that God knew. For you see, God saw Adam and Eve hiding in the garden in the cool of the day when he came for his daily visit. God saw Cain attacking Abel and killing him. God saw the destruction that would come to the lives of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. He saw where they would be driven from the garden. For you see, as Paul Harvey used to say, God knows the rest of the story, and he knows how it will end. And Satan simply says to Eve, he doesn't say to her, here, cut down the tree. Or he doesn't say to her, here, gather enough of these fruit to bake pie, and you'll have a most delicious fruit pie you've ever had. No, the devil doesn't say that. He simply says, here, try just a nibble. Just one little bite, just one little nibble. At our house, we enjoy those Edwards Hershey's chocolate pies. And they are so good. And I bring in one, and I can hardly wait to get it on the counter before I open up the container, take out a knife, get a plate, a dessert plate, and then cut a slice. But I don't cut it half in two. I simply say to myself, well, I'm going to try just a nibble. And I cut one little thin sliver of the pie, and I nibble that. And then I say, oh, that was so good. I think I'll have another, just a small sliver. One more small sliver won't hurt. And so I cut another small sliver, and I enjoy that so much. And then, well, maybe just one more. I know I've had two, and I know I should stop, but maybe just one more thin sliver of this pie because, oh, it is so good. It tastes so good. It is so pretty. I wouldn't dare take a knife and cut the pie in two and take a fork and sit at the table and eat a half a pie. But I can eat it one sliver at a time. And somehow or other, eating it one sliver at a time, it doesn't seem so greedy or so selfish or so gluttonous. But the pie is gone. So it is with sin. And the devil tells us, just as he told Eve, here, just nibble just a little bit. Just nibble just one small sliver of it, just one small piece. One small piece is not going to hurt. After all, it tastes so good, and it looks so good, and it is so appealing. And that's the way it is with sin. And we slide deeper into darkness and further away from the light, one sliver of sin at a time. For you see what Satan does, Satan begins small, and then he escalates. He says to Eve, just one sliver at a time, and then he escalates. Have another sliver, and another sliver, and another sliver. And the descent into darkness begins, and it escalates. How do we get in this mess? The problem that we're in. We got into it one sliver at a time, one small bite at a time, one small slice at a time, until we discovered that we had eaten half the pie of sin, and we were sliding further and further into darkness as a country and as a nation, as a people, culturally, socially, theologically, morally, mentally, further and further away. I would like to blame callous, complacent laity for this. for this slide, but I can't. That would be wrong. For the responsibility for this slide into darkness, and it pains me to say this. It hurts me in my heart, and I feel bad about saying it, but I believe it to be the truth. For you see, the responsibility for our slide into darkness lies at the feet of apostate pastors and preachers. Our descent away from God and to where we are today begins with deception and distortion and drift. It began with a theological drift that began in the 1800s that moved us further away from the rock upon which we stand, where Christ said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and against this rock the gates of hell will fall, and the walls of hell will crumble, and they will not stand, and they will be destroyed." But our descent begins with something that happened in the mid-1800s. There was a German scholar by name of Klaus Westermann. And he said, we can look at the Bible in a different way. And he had a good motive, I am sure. And he developed something called form criticism. And so far, so good, because he says that we will take the Bible and we actually can divide it into various sections with various types and titles. And so he said, well, we can know that there are the books of history, Genesis, Exodus, books of history. He says, well, we know that there are books of law, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and these are the books of the law. And then he says that there are the books of poetry, the books of Psalms, Proverbs, wisdom literature in Proverbs. And then he says we have a section known as the minor prophets and the major prophets, and then goes over and he says that there are the Gospels and there are the epistles of Paul and there is apocryphal writings. And so far we're okay, and we look at that today. Form criticism, but it was the beginning of a slide, because someone then came up with redaction criticism, and they said, well, we will edit the Gospels, and we will look at them very closely. We will examine them, and we will attach our own understanding to the sections of the New Testament. Keep in mind, this is a cosmic battle that began in the Garden of Eden when the devil came along, and when he said to Eve, I don't ask you to eat the whole thing, just nibble around the edges just a little bit. There is a cosmic battle that is taking place. And there's a cosmic battle that is bent on our destruction. And Satan says to the editors, why, you can scratch this part out. You can, if you please, redact this part. Redaction criticism. You could just scratch this out. Take a razor blade and just cut it from the Bible. And what did he say? The devil says to someone, somewhere, sometime, you don't really believe that Jesus turned water into wine, do you? And whoever was redacting the Bible said, well, that does seem kind of far-fetched. Could it really happen? And then they said, the devil says, no, it really did not happen. And so they redact that and they cut that out. And then they go a little bit further, and the descent into darkness begins to gather some speed. And the devil says, in this cosmic battle, with the instrumentality of man, with the best of motives perhaps, the devil says, now you don't really believe that Jesus raised the dead, do you? There was the daughter of Jairus. Do you really believe that he called that little girl back to life after she had been dead? Well, no, so says someone. Lazarus. Do you think that Jesus really stood at the tomb of Lazarus and said, Lazarus, come forth, and Lazarus came out? And then somebody else says, well, that just doesn't fit anything that we know about science or medicine or history, so it probably did not even happen. And so they cut that out and they redact it. Then there are the 10 lepers, the man with the withered hand, the little boy that had epilepsy, the man at the pool of Bethesda. On and on they go, cutting out and redacting. And the cosmic battle is being waged in the hearts and minds of people who should have known better. And then they get to something more important. And the devil says to someone, somewhere, sometime, in some way, do you really believe that God could inhabit a human being, that he could become incarnate in a man known as Jesus? Doesn't that just seem far-fetched to you? And that there could be something known as the conception through the Holy Spirit, immaculate conception? Why, that has never happened before. The virgin birth couldn't happen, so says the devil. And someone says, you know, that is very improbable, isn't it? And the devil gleefully dances around, clapping his hands, knowing that the descent into darkness is gathering speed. And then he takes it a step further. Do you think that he really died on the cross and that he was buried? Do you think he came out of the tomb? There are other explanations, says the devil. No, I don't think he came out of the tomb. Do you think he ascended back to the Father? No. Do you think he's coming in? No, probably not. And on it goes until this redaction criticism does tremendous damage to the Bible and to Christianity in general. And I'm sorry to say that there are elements of this that are taught in the Bible today, taught in seminaries today. I'm going to have to bring this to a conclusion, but I hope that you will tune in next week and let me be part of your day, because there is more to this. Because you see, it is as Isaiah said to the people of Israel when they were in a mess. He said to them, look back at the rock. Look at the rock from which you are chiseled, from which you are sculpted. Look at the rock. Look at the quarry, the rock quarry from which it came. And he said, stand on the rock. Listen to the words that are spoken. Obey those words. Look to those who have been faithful. And then you be faithful, and you stop the slide of the descent into the darkness by standing on the rock. Only an outline. Join me next week. There's a lot more to be said, and there's a lot better solution too. The Don Howell with today's outline of the sermon for the Liberty congregation. Come to Liberty. Worship with us. You'll find a warm, loving, gracious people. Thank you so much.